Welcome to Jung Journal, a space where the cracks in the soul are not hidden, but seen, heard, and healed from the root. In today's video, we'll dive deep into one of Carl Jung's most bold and compassionate insights. An addict doesn't need alcohol, they need a soul. Jung did not view addiction as a moral failure to be punished, nor merely as a sign of weakness. He looked straight into the unseen, where the human soul is crying out in the most distorted, desperate way. If you've ever felt empty, ever struggled with a painful habit you couldn't seem to break, this video is a gentle reminder. You don't need to be stronger. You just need to reconnect with yourself. Let's begin. 1. Addiction is not just a behavior. It's a symptom of inner disconnection. When we think of addiction, we usually think of behaviors, smoking, drinking, substance abuse, binge gaming, or endlessly scrolling social media. Society often labels addiction as a deviation, something wrong that needs to be fixed or eliminated. But Carl Jung saw addiction from an entirely different perspective. He believed addiction is not merely a problematic behavior, but a symptom, a signal that the soul has been severed from itself. Jung once wrote, "The alcoholic's craving is not for alcohol, but for spirit, for meaning. The addict isn't truly longing for alcohol, they're longing for spirit, for meaning." At a deeper level, addiction is an unconscious attempt to escape the unbearable sense of emptiness, disconnection, and inner confusion. When we can't tolerate the silence within ourselves, we try to fill it with something, anything from the outside. Addictive behaviors become a false remedy for a real pain. The pain of spiritual disorientation. The pain of not knowing who we are, what we're living for, or what we're connected to beyond ourselves. When the soul is deprived of nourishment, the body starts looking for an escape. The addict isn't chasing a high. They're fleeing the invisible loneliness deep inside. We can see this reflected in many modern forms. Someone endlessly scrolling social media, not because they care about others, but because they're afraid of feeling left behind. Someone diving into shopping, overeating, overworking, not because they need more, but because they can't stand the void inside. Addiction is a symptom, not the root. And if we only try to fix the behavior without addressing the emptiness beneath it, we're merely replacing one addiction with another. Carl Jung didn't try to eliminate symptoms. He tried to decode their message. Because behind every compulsion, behind every craving, there is a part of the soul crying out for help. That part of us was once wounded, abandoned, disconnected from the sacred experience of simply being ourselves. Addicts don't lack discipline. They lack connection. Connection to meaning, to their own hearts, to something greater than themselves. Something Jung called the self, the sacred center of the psyche. So healing isn't about forcing someone to quit. It's about opening a path for them to come home. A path where they feel they matter, they exist, they have worth even without temporary fixes. Addiction is the soul's warning. It is starving. It is dry. It is being forgotten. And if we are brave enough to look through the behavior, not just at it, every addiction becomes an invitation to return to the deepest part of ourselves. 2. Spiritus contra spiritum. Spirit against alcohol. Carl Jung once wrote in a letter to Alcoholics Anonymous, "The Latin word for alcohol is spiritus, used both for the highest religious experience and the most depraving poison. The helpful formula, therefore, is spiritus contra spiritum, spirit against spiritus." This wasn't just a clever play on words. It was a symbolic diagnosis, precise and profound. An addict doesn't seek alcohol, they seek a sacred experience. Not every person struggling with addiction realizes this consciously. But at a deeper level, each time they drink, they are trying to connect with something beyond the ordinary. A fleeting sense of warmth, euphoria, transcendence. A moment where they don't have to remember who they are. A state of surrender, free from torment, judgment, or isolation. This is what Jung referred to as a spiritual thirst. When the soul is not nourished by presence, meaning, or deep spiritual connection, it begins to grasp for substitutes. And alcohol, drugs, social media dopamine, unconscious sex, all of these are false spiritus, cheap replacements for true spirit. This is why Jung said, "Only spirit can overcome spiritus." Only a true spiritual connection can dissolve the pull of alcohol or any addictive substance. Healing from addiction cannot stop at behavioral control or willpower. You can lock someone away, cut off their access to addictive substances, but the thirst will still be there. A thirst for connection, a thirst for meaning, a longing to live in alignment with something more sacred than mere physical existence. Spiritus contra spiritum is a call to return, not to logic, but to the soul. Because what drives a person into addiction isn't just weakness, it's existential disorientation. When you don't know who you are, why you live, or what matters beyond the surface of life, it's easy to turn to something temporary to escape the void. And here lies the paradox. The more you use these things to forget yourself, the further you drift from your true self. The more you drink to relax, the more you lose control. The more you chase pleasure, the emptier you feel afterward. The higher you try to get, the lower you crash. Because that high is false, a distorted version of true spiritual experience. It's like drinking seawater to quench your thirst. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. There is only one true way to heal, to return. Not necessarily to religion or blind belief, but to reconnect with the self. The sacred center Jung described as the deepest, most whole part of the human being. When you reconnect with the self, you no longer need substances or compulsive behaviors to feel enough. You feel present, and that is the thing most addicts crave without realizing it. To be fully here. To live in the presence of their own soul. 3. Addicts need to be understood, not just treated. In a world obsessed with fixing and curing, addicts are often seen as system errors, a person to be sent to rehab, a problem to be removed, a behavior to be controlled. But Carl Jung didn't see them that way. To him, addicts were not criminals, nor were they merely patients. They were lost souls. Lost, not because they were weak, but because they were desperately trying to find a part of themselves they had lost. The part that connects to something sacred, to meaning, to the feeling of truly being alive. Society offers countless solutions: medication, behavioral control programs, pressure from family and friends, judgment from the community. But all of these only touch the surface. They might suppress the addiction, but they do not heal the thirst. They might stop someone from drinking, but they cannot make them feel whole inside. Jung believed only when a person reconnects with the sacred within themselves can addiction truly begin to lose its power. Because what addicts truly need is not stronger willpower, but a deeper connection. Think of it this way. Someone who has experienced loss, isolation, or deep wounds from an early age, if they've never had the space to process, to feel, to be heard, that pain doesn't disappear. It just sinks deeper and waits for a chance to emerge through behavior. From Jung's perspective, Addictive behavior is the soul's language, trying to speak, not to destroy, but to cry for help. But when addicts are locked into labels like broken, weak, or out of control, they lose the space to reconnect with the sacred part of themselves. And they begin to believe, I'm a failure. I'm unworthy. I'll always be a problem. Those beliefs only reinforce the addiction. Because when you believe you're hopeless, you'll seek something, anything, to make you forget. Jung didn't teach us to correct behavior. He taught us to observe the soul and listen to what it's missing. Addicts don't need someone to save them through pressure. They need someone who can see the part of them that's still human, but has never been acknowledged. They need a safe space to ask, what am I truly longing for? What did I lose in the past? How can I reconnect with what makes me feel truly alive? Once someone begins asking those questions, the journey of recovery is no longer about alcohol, drugs, or dopamine. It becomes a spiritual journey, a path of returning. And on that path, what we call addiction is no longer a life sentence, but a sign that the soul hasn't died. It's just waiting to be heard. 4. Addiction is the desperate cry of the shadow. Carl Jung called the repressed, denied, and forgotten parts of our unconscious the shadow. It's not evil, nor is it simply made of shameful or bad traits. The shadow is the collection of everything we cannot accept about ourselves. Old wounds we were told to ignore, emotions suppressed since childhood, aspects of ourselves society, family, or religion told us shouldn't exist. And because these parts were not allowed to exist, they didn't disappear. They simply went underground, into the unconscious, into dreams, into behaviors we can't explain. To Jung, addiction is one of the many broadcast channels of the shadow. When a part of you has been silenced for too long, unseen, unloved, it will find another way to make itself known. And sometimes that way is addiction. Not because you want to be addicted, but because a part of you, the part that was hurt, rejected, buried, is desperately trying to speak. Hidden pain doesn't fade with time. It simply returns through the most distorted roads. And addiction is one of those roads. Addiction is the unconscious repetition of a behavior, to numb the pain that hasn't been acknowledged. When you can no longer bear the emptiness, shame, rage, or grief, you'll try to escape it. And alcohol, drugs, sex, gaming, or social media become the temporary exits. But the problem isn't the behavior. The root is in the shadow, and in the fact that you've never truly faced it. Jung never saw the shadow as an enemy. On the contrary, he believed the shadow is the gateway to wholeness. Because when you dare to face the parts of yourself you once abandoned, were ashamed of, or tried to discard, you begin to reclaim the pieces of your fragmented self. That is true healing, not behavior control, not suppression of urges, but shining a light into the dark, hearing the voice beneath the pain, and embracing the part of you that's long been left behind. Imagine this. There's a wounded child inside you, and you locked them away, pretending they don't exist. But they're still there, crying, knocking, and if you keep ignoring them, they'll scream in any way they can, through addiction, through self-destruction, through an emptiness you can't explain. The way to heal is to open the door. Look directly, stop running, and say, I see you. I remember you. You don't have to scream anymore. When you begin to have a dialogue with the shadow, addiction no longer controls you. It becomes a message. And the one carrying that message is no longer just an addict, but a soul finding its way back home. 5. You can't heal addiction with willpower. Only through reconnection with yourself. One of the most common illusions about addiction is this: if you just have enough discipline, you'll break free. But reality is much harsher. Thousands of people are disciplined enough to work, raise children, and fulfill their social duties, yet silently battle addiction in the shadows. And countless rehab programs fail, not because people lack determination, but because they try to treat the symptom without touching the cause. You can quit drinking and still not quench the thirst of the soul. You can stop gaming and still feel empty, drained, like you don't belong anywhere. You can avoid every substance and still live like a hollow shell. Carl Jung did not believe in forcing people to change through sheer strength. He believed in inner transformation, a process that cannot be commanded, but must begin with reconnection to the soul. Jung once wrote, "Only the symbolic life can express the need of the soul. Only a life filled with depth and meaning, a symbolic life, can satisfy the soul's hunger." This statement opens a radically different perspective on healing. True healing does not come from control, it comes from feeling. Feeling that life holds a deeper layer of meaning. You deserve to be heard and present. You have a place, a journey, a center to return to. When you know who you are, you no longer need addiction to make you forget who you are. The issue is not dopamine. It's not weakness. The issue is this: you may have never been given the chance to live a life deep enough, real enough, connected enough. A life of symbols, of inner reflection, of feeling like you're walking a path that means something, rather than running from emptiness. Jung called this the symbolic life, a way of living that's not just about survival, work, or status, but about inner growth. And on that journey, addiction stops being something to fight. It becomes a wake-up call, a bell ringing to remind you. There's something you've forgotten. There's a part of your soul still unnamed. There's a way back, waiting for you to walk it. We can't force someone to stop their addiction through prohibition, but we can open a space for reconnection. With themselves, with their buried pain, with the light they thought they'd lost forever. True recovery doesn't come from victory. It comes from integration. Integration between the outer self and the inner soul. Between conscious reason and the forgotten shadow. Between the person you are and the person you were born to become. And when that integration begins, addiction no longer has a place to survive. Not because you force it to disappear, but because you no longer need it. Thank you for taking the time to listen and reflect with Jung Journal. We hope today's video offered you a new perspective that addiction is not a sign of being broken, but a quiet whisper from the soul longing to be heard. Because sometimes, what you're searching for isn't more self-control, but a deeper reconnection with the quiet place inside your heart. If something in this message resonated with you, please like, share, and subscribe so we can continue this journey together, a journey into the often forgotten depths of the soul. We'll see you in the next video where Jung isn't just philosophy, but a guiding light back to yourself. From Jung Journal, thank you, and take care.